Hello, and thank you for accessing our mini session, Top 5 Analytics Reports in 15 Minutes. This training is part of our Timely Topics Education series, which includes education and resources designed to speak to the current business climate. I'm your host, Naomi, and I'll be going over a few quick items before we get started. Everything you see on your screen is movable and resizable using the arrows in the corners. At the bottom of your screen are multiple widgets to support today's session, and I'll highlight a few now. If you have any questions about today's content, you can submit them through the Q&A widget, and we'll be sure to get back to you via email. We also have additional resources to support today's topic in the Resources widget that looks like a folder, so be sure to check that out. And finally, to help guide us on future topics, we ask that you complete a quick survey at the close of the session. You can find it in the widget that looks like a clipboard. Now that that's out of the way, I'd like to hand it off to our speaker for today's mini session, Christy Parker.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christy Parker. I'm a Senior Reporting Consultant for SAP Concur. Today, we're going to review 5 reports on the analytics platform, the top 5 in 15. I have chosen these 5 reports because they are beneficial for today's reporting needs. The 5 reports that we're going to review today are the Billed Transaction Reconciliation Details, the Expense Accrual, Expense Entry Analysis Details, the Invoice Accrual, and Credit Card Transactions. These are all reports that you can find on the analytics platform. So let's get started. The first report that we're going to review is Billed Transaction Reconciliation Details. This report allows the user to quickly reconcile with Concur on the number of billed transactions. The client has a set number of submissions in their contract that they are billed for. So with this report, you can see if you are over or under the submission count. This report is typically run on a monthly basis because that's how Concur does the billing. And you are able to see the employee that is submitting the expense report and the number of expense reports that they are submitting. So during this time, you might expect to see maybe an increase in expense report submission because there might be more employees expensing items that are related to home office type stuff. However, you might see a decline in the submissions because maybe there are less people traveling. So when you run this report, it'll give you a good idea of the number of reports that are being submitted. You might also want to use this report as a training guide for maybe employees that aren't used to submitting reports. Maybe they are creating multiple reports where they could have just placed all of the transactions in one report and submitted it that way, as opposed to creating numerous reports and submitting them separately. One thing that you are able to do when you run this report on the analytics platform is you can export this and you can have the report downloaded into either PDF or Excel platform. The next report that we're going to review is the Expense Accrual Report. This report shows all transactions that have not been assigned to an expense report or transactions that have been assigned to a report that have not been paid. So this report will provide visibility to financial professionals within the organization regarding outstanding liabilities and potential future cash requirements. This report is going to show the employee, their information, and if they have unassigned credit card transactions that have not been assigned to a report. So maybe they have numerous transactions, and if they are just sitting there, this could potentially be a liability with the credit card company and how we incur late fees. Typically, you don't want transactions to just sit there for 30, 45, 60 days because that could jeopardize the relationship with corporate cards. This also will provide visibility into employees that have their expense reports pretty much completed, but they haven't submitted them yet. This might be utilized as a training tool for employees regarding submission policy and maybe a process. Perhaps when they completed their expense report, they thought that they were finished. However, they really have to go one step further and actually submit the report for payment processing. You would be able to run this report and be able to show the employees that have this outstanding item so that they can get these sent in a timely manner. One thing that you're able to do on this platform within the report is how you filter the data. Perhaps you only want to see certain employees or certain payment types, maybe only certain date range periods. You're able to do that on the left-hand side of the platform, and you're able to filter it how you need. The next report we're going to review is the expense entry analysis details. This report tracks certain expense types and the employee that it is associated to each expense type. This is a transaction level report based typically on transaction date. This report is very useful right now because we can identify the shift in expense spend. We are going to be able to see where the increase in expense types are and where the decrease in expense types are. Right now, we would expect to see a higher expense type amount associated with home office use, so perhaps monitors, cell phone or home internet reimbursement, office supplies, webcams, headsets, and perhaps office furniture that you would need to expense. So when you run this report, you'll be able to identify those expense types, and this could also drive policy procedures. Maybe with these new expense types that aren't being utilized as much, you'll be able to identify that you need to put some policies and procedures around different ones. So maybe if you don't have anything for cell phones and employees are trying to get reimbursed for $100, $200, and what have you, you would put a limit and maybe just say $50. When you run this report, you're going to be able to identify the amounts associated with each expense type. You can also use this report to show where your expense type is mapped at the spend category. Maybe you have some expense types that weren't utilized, and because of that, you've had them placed into the spend category labeled as other. Well, that's not going to be super helpful when you have a lot of items that are mapped to the other field. You might want to use this report to drive change in how you map fields so that when you go to pull a report based on spend category, the visibility makes a little bit more sense and it's a little more intuitive. You don't want a whole lot of things just sitting in the other category. You can also identify who is spending the most on what certain types of expense items. One thing that you're able to do in the tool is you can group the data. So in this example, the report would be grouped on employee name. So you would be able to see everything based on that employee associated. You could also group it based on just expense type if you wanted to look at the data that way, and perhaps report name is another example of how you could look at the data. The next report that we're going to review is the Involce Accrual report. This report the logic is the same as the expense accrual report. It is a report that will show all invoices that have been created or submitted that have not been paid. It provides visibility to the financial professionals within the organization regarding outstanding liabilities and potential future cash requirements. So this report is based on the Invoice tool. And again, you can use this report. You will identify outstanding invoices and ensure that payments are being made in a timely manner. One thing that you might utilize this report for right now is if you had things that were on auto, things that were automatically being invoiced. However, with warehouses and different companies being utilizing limited resources right now and limited staff and reduction in hours, you might be able to identify some gaps in where things are being held up in the process. You can look at this information and see what is pending and what still needs to be paid at the invoice level. One thing that you can do with this report is if this is a report that you run on a weekly or monthly basis, instead of going into the system and manually running it every time, you can schedule the report and it would be automatically sent to you. This is a feature within the tool, and when you click on the scheduling icon, it prompts you for certain information, and this is going to let you enter in who the report will be sent to, the frequency, and then the start date and the end date of when you want the report to be emailed to certain users. This is beneficial so it saves a step and the user isn't having to go in and automatically run this report. And the last report that we're going to review today is credit card transactions report. This report lists credit card transaction details imported into Concur expense. So this is straight from the credit card feed, and it's going to show at the transaction level. We show the transaction ID, the payment type, some amounts associated to it, and then the vendor or merchant information. This report, you can use this to see possibly what type of, how they are using their corporate card. Maybe an employee isn't used to using their card and they are using it for some other items that perhaps shouldn't be used for a business card. When you run this report, you can quickly see what the merchants are. This report is imported, this report has the details that are imported from Concur, and it also shows payments as well as deductions. One thing that you're able to do within this report is maybe you need to modify the column. You can do this by clicking on the Edit button in the tool. You are able to rearrange the columns, and perhaps if maybe you didn't need some of the columns, you're able to just quickly remove them. Maybe you don't need to see at the transaction level, you just want to know the payment type and all of the amounts associated to each one. This is where you can utilize this feature of the edit and get the data exactly how you would want it. And that concludes my presentation, and I sincerely hope that this has been helpful and you're able to run some of these reports and gain visibility into your company spend and trends. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christy. If you would like to check out additional resources available on the Timely Topics Education page, please be sure to click through the link that can be found in the Resources widget. And as a final reminder, please be sure to complete the survey before you go. Thanks so much for joining us.